Her skin was still covered in the stench of charred flesh. It wasn't just from this morning, it was from previous nights when the iron had repeatedly kissed her body. A few of the wounds were blistering and raw. Others were already scarred, fractured, and darkened. Each mark, made by the same hands that once held her with promises of eternity, conveyed a tale. Within the forge, Eliza dangled against the post. The ropes had severed her skin because her wrists were chained so tightly. She seemed to be pleading for air as her huge tummy pressed forward. However, the furnace's heat enveloped her like an oppressive blanket. She gasped as her breath came, her hair clinging to the perspiration on her cheeks, her head sagging. Her body served as a battlefield for both new and ancient cruelty. The bruises on her arms talked of nights when fists had fallen harder than the hammer on the anvil, and the burns on her thighs screamed every time she moved. Iron glowed vivid red in the flames as the forge raged. The instruments of labor have turned into weapons of torture. She was no longer able to count the days. Caleb would sometimes leave her shackled for hours. Occasionally, he would come back and push her closer to the flames while observing her sobs as though they were fuel. She had originally thought that his arms were designed to shelter her from the harsh realities of the West because of his strength. She was now aware of this. Her spirit was meant to be broken by those arms. "It hurts inside, too," she muttered to the quiet, her lips cracking. The words described not just her body but also her soul, which was more scorched and bruised than anyone should have to go through. "Please, just hold on," she whispered to the kid inside of her as she closed her eyes. "Don't abandon me, please." With a creak, the door opened. On the ground, heavy footsteps resounded. Her heart ceased to beat. Was he already back? However, it was not Caleb who entered the forge. It was a tall rancher with a crimson scarf, nodding at his neck, and worn boots that were dusty from the trail. Jed had simply come to purchase a pair of horseshoes. He was unaware that a nightmare was confined to a post beyond the smoke of the forge and the heat of the fire. In the doorway, Jed froze. He initially believed that his eyes were playing tricks, but then Eliza raised her head, her voice quivering like a dying flame, and her eyes glossy with tears. It was also painful on the inside. "Save my baby, please. I'll go crazy if I stay here." More than any blade, the words sliced through him. He has witnessed men dying in duels and storms destroying ranches. However, he had never witnessed such agony. Her words was drowned out by every scar on her body. This was hardly the image of a woman who had just encountered difficult circumstances. This was intentional, ruthless torture. With the sound of his boots crunching in the quiet, Jed took a step forward. As he saw the deep grooves in her wrists and the new blood coloring the fibers, he went for the ropes with trembling hands. Too weak to stand, Eliza fell into his arms as he cut them free. The weight of what he had just seen was far greater than her own. He dragged her outside, where the sun was still shining, and away from the oppressive heat of the forge. For the first time in days or even weeks, she breathed something other than smoke and terror when the wind brushed her skin. Jed turned to face the forge, its fire still ravenous and its flames still alive. How could a guy abandon his wife to burn like that? And what would happen if that man came back? In an abandoned shed near the forge, Jed carefully placed her on the wooden bench used for cowboy love stories. Warm light streamed across her face as the sun crept through the wall's gaps. Eliza was breathing smoke-free air for the first time in hours, if not days. He handed her a tiny water flask. She put her palm to her stomach as though to soothe. The kid inside of her then drank with shaky hands, pouring drops down her chin. Jed was silent while he waited. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He had learnt from the West that sometimes responses came only when a soul was prepared to speak. She paused for a while before whispering, "I used to work at the saloon in town." Her voice broke due to the weight of memories rather than shame. "I was never trusted by Caleb. He used every man who looked in my direction as an excuse to hit me." The town's residents also began conversing, and his fists were as deep as their murmurs. Jed remained silent. He simply gave her a steady nod to indicate that he was paying attention. Once I fled, tears welled up in her eyes once more. I believed I could get away. I had nowhere to go, despite my belief that I could start afresh. A few weeks later I returned, and he had already come to that conclusion by then. He claimed that the child inside of me was not his, and that I had been with another man. He made me pay for a transgression I never committed after that day. The words lingered in the atmosphere. Jed's jaw clenched. He has previously witnessed cruelty. However, this was a different kind of Western story. This was a husband using love as a kind of punishment. A blacksmith who attempted to instill dread in his own wife instead of shaping iron. Eliza felt her burns with trembling hands. "These scars," she murmured, "they are not mishaps." He held me close to the flames. He watched me recoil as he pressed the iron close. When I started crying, he said, "I deserved it." Jed clenched his hand, trying to maintain composure. Anger burned quickly and faded, as a man who had spent 50 years on the frontier knew. But make a decision. Resolve has the power to move mountains, and he needed resolution right now. He gave her a look. His voice was steady and quiet. "You are now secure. He won't touch you again as long as I'm standing." For the first time. She smiled at him, but it was as brittle as dawn light, peeking through storm clouds. But even as she slept, and Jed assured her that she would be safe, the sound of heavy boots could be heard on the ground. The blacksmith was back. Outside the shelter, the sound of boots became more audible. With his hand unconsciously resting close to the dagger on his belt, Jed got to his feet. Eliza gripped her stomach as though to protect the kid, and her breathing increased. He was there when the door crashed open. The doorway was filled with Caleb. His face was coated with soot and sweat. Like a bull about to charge, the blacksmith's chest rose and sank. His gaze first settled on Eliza and then on Jed, and a vicious grin appeared on his face. Caleb snarled as a result. "I was aware of it. You rushed over to him. Didn't you always want him?" Jed said nothing. Eliza shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But he was not the type of man to waste words when action could be required. "I never did, Caleb." Before she could finish, her voice broke. Caleb lifted the bulky blacksmith's hammer he was carrying. "Don't tell me lies. Everyone in the town is talking about you. I can now see it with my own eyes. Hiding behind him like a guilty woman, you are in his arms." With a steady, deep voice, Jed moved forward. "Put down the hammer. She is innocent of all charges. You are aware of it in your heart. You are aware of it." However, Caleb was the cause of the past. He swung the hammer with a yell. Jed reacted, quickly, taking the knife from his belt and dragging Eliza behind him. Splinters flew as the hammer struck the wooden beam. Jed slashed across Caleb's arm in retaliation. The blacksmith would be stunned, but it wouldn't be profound. The air was heavy with dust and the stench of blood as the two men circled, one carrying steel and the other iron. Eliza yelled out, pleading with them to stop, but the sound of wood, fire, and rage drowned out her words. Once more, Caleb struck Jed's shoulder with his hammer, causing anguish to rush down his side. With all of his might, Jed shoved Caleb back while gritting his teeth and planting his boots in the soil from the Wild West romance film. The blacksmith staggered for a brief period, his hammer hitting the ground. Instead of striking, Jed's voice thundered as he raised his knife. "Enough. You've caused enough harm. This is where it ends." Eliza broke the silence with her sobbing voice. "Please, Caleb, you own the child. Stop before it is too late." For a heartbeat, Caleb halted, his face contorted between skepticism and wrath. However, there was a thunderous sound of hooves outside. The law had shown up. As the marshal's voice echoed behind them, Jed's gaze remained fixed on Caleb. Let go of the hammer. Take a step back. Justice was now in charge of the blacksmith's destiny. For the first time, Jed thought that Eliza could be safe. Now, my friend, if you're still here, take a drink of tea, recline, and allow this tale to sink in. Tell me where you are, what time it is, and where you are listening. Additionally, click the subscribe button to ensure you never miss the next episode if you want to continue riding along with me through future Wild West stories. The old shed's walls trembled from the altercation. Jed showed his knife. The sound of iron hitting wood reverberated over the field as Caleb swung his hammer. Eliza's voice broke like glass as she shouted out, pleading with them to stop as dust filled the air. Then the sound of boots came from outside. A strong voice broke through the commotion as the door flung open. "Enough! Set it aside!" It was Sheriff Morgan, a man who had spent more time on these roads than most people had. As he passed the property's edge while on patrol, he heard a woman's cries and the sound of steel colliding. His eyes were as cold as stone as he stood in the doorway, his hand on his gun. With his knife still in his hand, Jed froze, his chest heaving. Torn between fear and anger, Caleb gazed at the sheriff while his hammer trembled. "This is none of your business, Morgan," Caleb snarled. "My house, my wife, leave!" Calm yet firm, the sheriff entered. "Not when I hear fighting. Not when I hear her scream. Let go of the hammer." Caleb hesitated for a second. Then Jed spoke, his tone acerbic with rage. "Follow his instructions. You've already caused enough harm." The sheriff was quicker than Caleb, who yelled and rushed once more. The handgun came out of its holster. The blacksmith was stopped in his tracks by the sound of the hammer cocking. With a dull thud, his hammer fell from his grasp and hit the ground. Caleb's countenance was unreadable as the sheriff swiftly bound his wrists with rope. Finally releasing the air he had been holding, Jed lowered his knife. Eliza slid into the wall. She was trembling, clutching her stomach and shedding tears. Morgan looked at her, then at Jed. What took place here? Eliza's murmur preceded Jed's opening words. "I was hurt by him. He bound me. He desired for me to burn." The sheriff's gaze narrowed. He had thought Caleb was a tough guy. However, this was something more sinister and brutal than the frontier law could overlook. He observed the fear in her eyes, the cuts on her wrist and the burns on her arms. He pulled Caleb to his feet by tightening the knots around his hands. "You'll respond to this. Your falsehoods won't be as powerful as every mark on her body." The sheriff pulled Caleb outside into the sunlight, despite his attempts to wriggle away while cursing. Once a proud man, the blacksmith was now reduced to a prisoner. His anger lost its strength. Eliza leaned onto Jed as he steadied her and assisted her in standing. Her body shook, yet she was no longer alone for the first time. The sheriff nodded as he turned to face them. "This is only the beginning. We'll learn the truth. Everything." With those remarks, Jed realized that the flames had lost. But will Eliza's wounds from Caleb ever heal? Or would they follow her around forever? Caleb's curses faded into the distance as the sheriff carried him away, leaving only silence. With the evening sun streaming across his shoulders, Jed stood in the shed's doorway. With a feeble body but a strong spirit, Eliza leaned against his arm. She was free of fear and ropes for the first time in years. Weeks passed between days. Jed welcomed her to his property, where the aroma of grass rather than smoke filled the air. There, rather than in a forge intended to leave scars, the soul fire glowed softly in the hearth. Eliza recovered gradually. The scars on her skin would never go away, but every time she heard Jed's calm voice reassuring her that she was secure, the ones on her heart started to soften. When the time arrived, the ranch house was filled with the newborn's cries. As he cradled the child for the first time, Jed stood close by, his rough hands shaking. "You gave us life twice," Eliza whispered as she watched through tears. "Once when you saved me from the fire, and once again when you provided a home for this child." Seasons went by. The boy toddled across the porch one afternoon, scarcely able to stand. His voice was crisp and bright as his small arms extended towards Jed. "Papa." With stinging eyes and a heart full of feelings he was unable to express, Jed froze. The child had given him something stronger than any victory and more enduring than any battle in that one word. He had given him a family. Perhaps this is the story's real message. Violence, dust, and men who thought that strength came from a pistol or a fist were all prevalent in the West. However, true strength lies in the silent decision to love, care for, and protect. Even while scars may still exist, they can serve as a reminder of both suffering and survival. Do we allow the fire to define who we are, or do we emerge from it stronger than before? I want to know if you would have entered that forge if you were Jed. Would you have put your life in danger for someone who had already been condemned by others? And after experiencing so much cruelty, would you still have faith in love if you were Eliza? Take a time to consider that, my buddy. Please take a moment to like the video if this story resonated with you. It makes these stories from the Wild West more accessible. To ensure that you don't miss our next journey across the frontier, hit subscribe. Pour yourself another cup of tea while you're here, recline, and let me know in the comments what time it is, where you are, and what you're listening to.